As introduction, my name is Jennifer Despain, and I teach both Spanish and English at North Carolina State University. And so it's nice to be able to talk to our neighbors to the south. It's a little chilly here this morning. And I think it's probably still a little chilly there. And maybe Robin was saying it heats up in the middle of the day. So you're still getting some nice warm weather. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Oops, hang on. All right. I'm assuming you can see that okay? Perfect. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead. There we go. Whoops. Okay. All right. So this section or this talk is called Respect for Dialects, Educating about Language Diversity. And I love your communities, the communities of practice, strengthening communities of practice. I've been working with this respect for dialects theme for a couple of years now, and I'm finding some really interesting results. I work with students here at North Carolina State who are graduate students, undergraduates, as well as visiting scholars, and sometimes they're family members, their adult family members that come to some of our non-credit classes. They join as well. So that's the community that I'm working with. And one of the recent experiences that I had was in attending an open house for the international students. It's the first one of the semester. And I was there just welcoming, letting them know about the English classes that we have. And I was working with some of our colleagues over in the Department of English, and they were handing out these pins that say "Howl with an Accent." So at North Carolina State University, our mascot is the wolf pack. And so, we go off of that. And so I didn't realize that wolves have accents depending on where they're from. And so they had created this pin. And so we talked about that as people would come by saying, we love that you're here. We love that you bring everything that you have, and hopefully we'll be able to add to your knowledge, and we'll work together, we'll collaborate. And one of the students came over and looked at that pin, and she says, "Howl with an accent." She goes, "I don't have an accent." And I thought it was quite interesting because she had only been in North Carolina for a couple of days. And to my ear, she had a very pronounced Southeast Asian Indian accent. But I thought from her perspective, she didn't have an accent. But I think within the next couple of days, she was going to realize that there's a great diversity at the campus. And so it reminded me of this quote that I often see. S.K. Gupta, the aerospace engineer, says, "If some of you detect an accent, please remember that I didn't have one until I came to this country." So that kind of gives us a good perspective that, everyone comes from a different location. They learn English in different locations. So one of the first questions that I usually treat is, okay, what's the difference between an accent and a dialect? And I'm going to go off of Walt Wolfram and Schilling's definition in their book called American English Dialects and Variation. So it delineates that an accent is a popular label for dialect with particular reference to pronunciation or syllable stress. And then another note, it says speech is often influenced by another language. And then in that same book, it talks about dialect is a variety of language associated with a particular region or social group. So we'll kind of use those interchangeable today, but you kind of get the idea that, it is speech influenced by another language. Oftentimes there's a social group involved or a regional aspect to it. So what was my motivation for developing this series of lessons for respect for dialect? So as I said, the students that I was working with would come in to class, and we would open up just how are you doing? You know, that sort of thing. And they would often would talk about some of the difficulties that they'd had in their communications over the week. Either they heard something they didn't understand, or they were trying to communicate something that that clearly didn't get across to their listener. And so they were expressing frustration. And they were also quite open about expressing some negative perceptions about certain racial groups. And so that kind of came as a concern to me. And I saw how as they were kind of commiserating together, they were saying, oh yeah, you know, so they were accepting these negative stereotypes together as a group. And then some were even talking about avoidance behaviors, like, well, I don't go to such and such a place because I know that certain people are going to be there. Like one of them said that they wouldn't go to a certain grocery store because there were clerks there at the checkout that they had a difficult time understanding, and they were of a certain racial you know, distinction. And so that, okay, you know, maybe we need to treat this kind of head on, and see. We want them to be able to collaborate well with everybody. And our campus, as likely on all of your campuses too, you have a rich diversity, and you know, we don't want them to be limited. And we also don't want them to feel like they can't go someplace or they to get into those avoidance behaviors. We want to be able to be helpful so that they don't have those experiences. So that was my motivation. So I did some reading, and I'll just highlight a couple of the articles that I looked at. But Major et al. In their effects of dialects on English on listening comprehension talked about the definite transition that happens for international students as they come from their home country. Some are used to speaking English with a certain dialect in their home country, and then they come to the United States, depending on where they're at, and have to maneuver new English dialects. And so they just talk about that transition. And then in Scales et al., the language learners' perceptions of accents, they spoke about the research that they did. They noticed that the students, the participants, had a difficult time identifying English, you know, mainstream American English from British English, from Chinese English, or Spanish influence English. Those were the four groups that they looked at. And so they basically saying they have a difficult time differentiating between those four. And then they also talked about the necessity of students being exposed to and involved in analyzing and comparing key characteristics of a variety of pertinent accents. And so the definite teaching of and analyzing of those dialects. And then ultimately, here at NC State, Dunstan and Wolfram, Yeager and Crandall did a study about raising awareness of linguistic diversity. And they added that TESOL instructors should incorporate relevant, concrete scenarios to help students command both mainstream English as well as other varieties. And so with that background, I started thinking, okay, I need to look at ways that I can do some effective teaching to help students identify patterns and the rule governedness of all the different dialects that they experience here on campus. So my objectives were to raise awareness regarding linguistic diversity, especially here on our campus, and then to educate about language variation and increase sensitivity to variations. And then also talk about the effects of bias, getting back to, you know, those conversations that we had with
it said linguistic.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. With their preconceived notions, their stereotypes about particular groups. So the objectives of each of the lessons that I'm sharing with you today, we want students will examine diversity and comparatively process, that there's no one single correct variety or standard of spoken language. They would learn that all dialects are systematic and patterned and rule governed, that variations of English impact all of us in some way or another, not just them, right, as learners of English. And then because the class that I was working with was an English conversation class, we had conversations about the variations in language and talked about being inclusive and respectful. So the dialects that the international students were able to communicate that they had a difficult time understanding ranked this way. So they indicated that Southeast Asian Indian English was most difficult for them, then African American English, and then English spoken by native Chinese speakers, Southern accented English, and then ultimately Spanish influenced English they felt was not as difficult to understand. So with that, I chose 3 of these to treat. And each of the lessons start with a little bit of a history. They talk about the rules and the patterns, presented in a way where the students will discover the rules, not me just spouting them off, but I want them to be able to look at the patterns and see if they can find them. And then we talk about some specific characteristics. And then we have a conversation about those. So that's kind of the basic outline of each of those. So in Dunstan's research, she brought up a really good point for us here in North Carolina. She did a study with students who spoke a stigmatized variant of rural Southern Appalachia. She talked with them and said, now that you're here, in Raleigh, it's kind of central. We're about 2.5, 3 hours away from their home region. How did that impact them here on campus? And she found that those students are hesitant to speak out. These are native English speakers, hesitant to speak out, that their dialect negatively influenced their comfort level. They felt like they had to work harder to prove their intelligence, and it impacted their sense of belonging because they were not around their own community anymore. They're in this mixture on campus. And they also felt the need to code switch. And so taking this information to the students that I have, who are the international students who very often work as TAs, this provided a basis for some of the lessons, understanding that their students that they're teaching feel sensitive about their dialect. So let's take a couple of minutes and we'll just kind of skim through 3 lessons. This is the lesson for Southern US. We'll pull that up. Okay. And and we won't, obviously I'm not going to go through each of these, but I do have a short clips here that assist the students in understanding that dialects are rich within the state. And so at these time frames, we're able to listen to students who are from these different areas and realize that even in this one state, we have distinct dialects and patterns and accents. Here, let's not go there. And then we talk about what I just shared with you, that the students that they are teaching, some of them are hesitant to speak out. They don't feel comfortable. And so what can they do to draw them out and help them to feel comfortable? So we have a conversation to kind of give a good basis. Tell us about, your home country. What's the impact of conscious or unconscious bias related to a person's regional accent or dialect? And I've done these lessons several times, and I've never had anybody say, "Oh no, we're not biased against anybody." It's always like, "Oh, usually the standard is a difference between rural and urban." That kind of a standard things. Well, if they come from the south of such and such a city, you can tell. And yeah, there's a little bit of a stigma to that. So we have a conversation about some of those things within their own experience in their home country. And then bring in some comical sort of things, right, to talking about Southern dialects. And we listen to, where you from? And I'm about to have a come apart. So we go through some of the idiomatic expressions that you guys probably are well familiar with, good gravy. And we go through some of these and say, some of these are regional food related. Some of these are, we just talk about some of these specifics. And we often bring it up and say, what have you heard that you have felt like, what in the world does that mean? And so it becomes a really good conversation piece and just a teaching time to say, okay, what that means is da da da. And especially, the bless her heart, bless your heart. Well, there's a little veiled, a little something underneath there, that it's not all about compassion, right? So we talk a little bit about that. Here, I'm not going to look at that. Okay. And then we look at some specific characteristics that they might come into contact with. So the pin-pen merger, double modals, the might could, that they're confused by, like, why are they using two of the, okay, well, it's a regional thing. And diphthongs, the way that those rag, glad, and had. So I'll keep going. So you kind of get the idea of what we bring out, what I talk about, some of the characteristics, some of the rules that govern a specific dialect.
Jen, we were just talking in the chat about soda versus pop, and I'm from the north, so water fountain versus bubbler.
Exactly. And aren't those I love all those variations because it tells a story, right? And you just want to be like, wait a minute, tell me more about where you're from. Tell me more about your story. Okay, and then we get into we often do this lesson on African American vernacular English. And I may just stay in this format so you can see. We start out with this quote by Nelson Mandela: if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to a man in his language, that goes to his heart. And so we talk about, does that still, how does that impact when you understand and use somebody's dialect, or you are able to converse in that dialect and understand it? And so we have a conversation very similar to the one we had before about, has your difficulty in understanding someone affected the way you perceive others as a whole? And that tends to be an interesting conversation, both in their home country as well as their experience here in the United States. Here's an example of discovering a pattern. So this is the full slide. This is animated, so it doesn't have the clues here of the circles around the words usually, when, and always. I have them read these and say, can you discover the pattern here? They usually be tired when they come home. When we play basketball, she be on my team. And then if they're coming up, they're getting groups of two, they're working out, trying to think, I don't know, let's see. Normally it would be like they usually are tired. And so they're working through it. And then if they get the idea that, okay, look, there's a usually, when, and always, and sometimes I have to share that with them. And then they start going, oh, okay, so this is when we're talking about a habitual action. And so then we start looking at that and saying, aha, there's a rule to it. Another one would be a prefixing. And so we look at the top three examples of ones that follow the rule. So they were a building, she was a following, he went a hunting, and saying, this is what you would hear. What's the pattern? What do you see? And they can say, well, okay, the verb ends in ing. Okay. And so they start looking through that. And so then if they need a little bit more help, you say, okay, well, here's something that doesn't follow the rule. You can't say they like a building houses. She was a discovering. He went, so then you say, okay, what is it about? What's the differences with those? Why can't you say this, but you can say that? And so then ultimately we talk about, well, you can't use it with a gerund. You can't use it with a verb that the spoken stress is not on the first syllable. You know, and that sort of thing. So then they start understanding, aha, so this isn't just somebody throwing something out there because they think it sounds cool. No, this is a rule governed language, or dialect rather. And then we had the completive done. So she done ate the food, I done forgot what you wanted, he done washed the clothes. And so what does that mean? This one has a little bit more of a meaning based. And so we talk about the difference between this carries a lot of meat to it. So in standard English, we would have to put a lot more words into it to really get to the point of what a person is trying to say. Let's see. And then here's an example of a slide where we talk about some vocabulary or specific expressions. And I have short videos, short little clips where they can hear somebody saying it. So like for this one, let's see, let's do this one, fixin' or finna. So here's a teacher. Oh, sorry, we're gonna have you add, I think. Well,
Ready to start eating healthier?
sorry.
Meet Kachava. Kachava is the world who never dreamed he could become a teacher.
English, when I got to high school, was like, it was always a rough patch for me. I remember getting corrected on so many times where when I used to say finna, I'm finna go do this. They'd be like, wait, what? What? You finna do what? And they'd be like, you're about to go over here.
So I try to find clips where a person is saying what we're talking about, so that they have that auditory input. And when we talk about, you know, this is what it means. This is the context of where you would hear it. And then ultimately we talk about, you know, English language varieties are not deviant forms of language. They are all rule governed. And so that's kind of a snippet on the African American vernacular. Oops, sorry. Yeah. And then this one is the Southeast Asia, so the Indian English. And again, a similar format, right? So with this one, I talk about, you know, understanding the significant contributions made by varieties of English to mainstream language fosters deeper respect and appreciation for not only the variation itself, but also for the people who speak it. Celebrating the diversity that exists around us ignites wonder, appreciation, and unity. That's what our hope is, right? And so that's what I try to do within these lessons. Here we talk about the borrowed words that English has from the many Indian languages, right? So we talk about, have you heard these? Well, we're borrowing words from the different English languages that exist. And so often they'll look at the, oh yeah, oh, of course I've used this. And oh yeah, pajama, yeah, okay, I know these. So we language is a fluid thing. We borrow and we use. So for Indian English, we talk about on the left side, those would be animated and come up. You might hear something, where are you put up? What does that mean? It means, where do you live? Like, what do you live in an apartment? You know, what's your address, basically, right? What is good name? What is good name? If you know just some of these basics, then you can communicate. Your communication isn't you're not stumbling across yourself trying to figure out what they're talking about. It means, what's your full name? If this is a good one, especially in the academic realm, right? If someone, when do you pass out? What? When do you pass out? Oh, they're talking about graduating. Okay, next semester. You know, in May I do. And then the references to days, today morning, yesterday night. So just giving a couple of things that are quite common in the community that we work in can help a lot. And then we also talk about some cultural things as well, because a lot of our graduate students, you work in teams, they're in labs, that sort of thing. And so one Indian native said, you know, make yourself comfortable with uncomfortable situations, especially when it comes to small talk. Americans don't tend to get as personal as quickly as we Indians do. So they need to understand that there's a cultural element there in their communication that that they may be talking about very personal things quite quickly, which may not be congruent with what their native culture does. And then some other aspects that I know that they run into, micromanaging or managers. We, you know, depending on what culture they come from, coming in and interrupting a project or being highly involved from a manager might be unusual for them. But if they know, oh, my supervising instructor hails from India, and so I wouldn't be surprised if they were quite involved. Or that, you know, showing genuine interest, being involved, or the blurring of the workday doesn't always end at 5. So weekends, they might be contacting you and expecting you to come to an event or something like that. So we pull in some cultural elements as well. Here's an example of some phonology that we look at, like this, let's see, the TH stop or the tapped R, the VW merger. So I have, let's see, starting at 55, if we go out here, there's a clip. That we can listen to that.
Commonplace was Indian cuisine. Oh, no. Indian was not a common cuisine. Indian food was not even known that very well. I mean, you had to search for Indian restaurants. And I remember when my first visit in early 60s, there were hardly a few restaurants in Grafton Way in central London or in Drummond Street. But of course, then the Mama Papa operation was coming up.
So being able to, again, listen to an authentic audio clip, to be able to say, listen for the Indian food was or was, but you might have a little bit of a V, very well, ven, visit, the, and so just identifying some specifics so that they are aware when they're listening to their professor, you know, that it's not wrong, it's different and it's rule governed. And I thought it was interesting. I spoke to the diversity, equity, and inclusion manager of a Advance Auto here. It has their headquarters, and the person was talking about Diwali. And I just noted, he's saying it with a V instead of a W. It's spelled with a W, but he's including the VW merger. And so we hear it all over the place. And again, we'll have a conversation about what they hear, about what they're experiencing, so that they can have an opportunity to speak about the challenges that they are finding in their communication efforts at the university here. So those are the elements of what we look at here. I'm going to skip through this one since we already talked about that. And some of the reactions after I present 1, 2, or 3 of these lessons, both to the students as well as I often have interns that are from our TESOL certificate program. They're coming in to observe and to do micro teaching and things like that. And this came from Marissa, who, interestingly enough, comes from a mixed race background. And we had just completed the lesson on African American vernacular English. And she stayed on afterwards, stayed in the classroom, and she was like, she was blown away. She was like, I had no idea. I go home and this is my language. This is what I speak. I had no idea that there was rule governed. You know, she didn't really think about it. She was blown away. She thought it was so cool to learn about her own dialect. And this is from Mildred, who is also African American. She said, Unfortunately, in most schools, I believe we're taught that English dialects are inferior to standard English. If our language is our own identity, then this sense of superiority versus inferiority affects how we feel about and treat one another. I really appreciate the efforts to educate people about the validity of African American language rather than it being relegated solely to the purview of a Black history class. It gives me a lot of hope. That was just a couple weeks ago. And that, to me, that's significant, right? That's significant that she sees this as a positive thing. And then Monica, who is also multiracial, she said, as we learned, there are rules and structures in the vernacular. It's not poor English. And we watched part of the documentary. And she said that I thought a very powerful moment in the documentary was when one of the interviewees says that her language is not broken. And then she kind of reflects and says, who's it broken for? Broken for who? And so looking at the different varieties of English helps put all of us on the same level, right? And helps us to be respectful to everybody. I've got a clip here. I'm not sure that the audio is very good here for this specific thing, so I summarized this a little bit over here on the left-hand side. This is Paul. Paul is from Taiwan, and I talked to him after a class, and he said, I have a definite goal because of this class that we have. He said he recognized that he kind of congregates with other people from Asia because they're easier to understand amongst themselves, he said. But he said, I know as a TA, in order to understand other people, we need to learn about their accents. My goal is to understand he called us customers, other customers. He means students, other customers, others more. And so he felt inspired by learning more and wanted to continue to learn about that. I think I'll skip this because I think the audio, I listened to it later and it just wasn't that great. So anyway, so in conclusion, what I found was incorporating explicit instruction regarding English language varieties into all courses, not just, it depends, like if you work K through 12, and you teach a specific content, it's necessary. It's a necessary part of outfitting not only the multilingual learners, but all students with the tools that they need to achieve communicative competence in a variety of circumstances. And so giving students opportunities to engage in a discovery of culture, history, and the rules of varieties of English broadens their perspectives and battles biases and stereotypes. And so we have a good amount of time. I want to hear from you. In what ways have you or will you be advocating and promoting linguistic diversity within your sphere of influence? I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other a little bit better. And I'm going to open the chat so I can see that a little bit too. So what do you all think? What has been your experience in talking about, celebrating different individuals, different students' home languages or their variety of English?
I know this is a big concern. Accents are a big concern with like my higher levels, my level 6s in ESOL. And I always tell them, we all speak differently, and it's a beautiful thing. It's not a disability because they have an accent, and that unless they had learned the language before puberty or before 12, then everyone has an accent. So
yeah.
And my Spanish is I have a terrible accent in Spanish. So I'll give them a line in Spanish. I'm like, see, it's very, very, very.
But you can still understand me, right? It's kind of, and that's a distinction I always like to make, is that, and I do teach a pronunciation class where we treat like, word stress and things like that, where, if you say, record versus record. You know, that's important because that'll send you off in a different direction. But it's those kind of things that that are important to kind of identify and to work on versus, you know, oh, let's work on that VW merger, you know, and really most people will understand, right? So
Local
yeah,
errors versus global for sure.
yeah. What else? What other experiences have you had, or how do you imagine being able to incorporate some of these ideas into your own classroom? Some of you might be, I don't know, you might be administrators, or I don't know, what levels do you teach? Okay, I have another question. So for you, where you guys are at, what dialects would you highlight? What's common in your area? Yeah, Francisco.
Hello, good morning. Sorry, hi.
Good
Some
morning.
technology issues there as well.
No problem.
And my name is Francisco, or Francis, I also go by. But I'm based here in Central Florida. I'm an MA TESOL student at University of Central Florida. But I have only recently started my own classroom teaching journey. But I guess it is hard in a very transient city like Orlando to I guess identify some of the communities that my students are interacting with. I try to ask that question. You know, of course, do they have mostly like a support system if they're coming from a specific community, but also I guess kind of what do they hear on the daily basis. So I open that up always for discussion after we've kind of maybe covered a grammar topic, after we've covered a reading challenge, and just kind of gauge where they're at in their daily lives. But I find that, I guess, a bit difficult though at the same time because it is so broad.
Yeah.
And of course, my knowledge on that, I would like to increase more. But how regionalized, I guess, is your research that you've done? I know even with African American vernacular English, there's even, you know, there's a Baltimore variety, there's you know, Southern in Alabama and Louisiana variety. I suppose, I guess, just how obviously
How broad does it go? Yeah, and that's a good point, because you know, ultimately, really, the point is not that it's not a class about the specific variety. We do highlight some aspects, some characteristics, right? And it's pretty general. It's pretty general, and I do try to find some specifics from like Appalachia or coastal regions, and I really try to like who's here that they are interacting with, and try to pick out some basics. But it really is kind of the general idea that all the varieties are rule governed and patterned and have a history. They're not just a mishmash of whatever, you know. And that therein lies a lot of the idea that's like, oh my goodness, okay, so this is not something that just started with a bunch of teenagers or something like that, right? And so I would worry less about you know, well, I need to treat, you know, like you're saying, Baltimore. If I lived in Baltimore, I would get some audio samples from students there, right, and talk about that. But yeah, I think for me, it's less about specific varieties and just the general idea that we respect all of these varieties, and look how they are rule governed. And here's a couple of characteristics, and then you can continue the discussion, you know, and say, you know, what have you heard? Bring that into the class. We'll spend 5 minutes before class every time, and bring it in, and let's learn together. Yeah. Priscilla, what about you? Where do you teach? What do you do?
Actually, I just started teaching 1 year ago, was a private lessons, and now I'm in a school like Celebration Language Institute, and I teach real starters.
Yeah, oh boy, yeah.
And they most Brazilians, and I'm Brazilian too.
Okay, great.
And 2 Chinese, and that's so I love the class right now, the things you were saying, because they are afraid to speak because of the pronunciation, the accent, and everything. And as a language lover that I am, I think we should pass through this and go forward, because English is such a beautiful language. And even though with our accents, we are able to speak and to communicate.
Absolutely, absolutely. What an exciting start of your journey. That's
Yeah,
wonderful. That's great. Well, I know we just have a couple of, I put the materials in, there's a Google Drive link over in the chat. Please use it, please modify it, just copy it, make it your own. Look at the resources, because that may, spur you to go find, like Francisco, you were talking about the different African American vernacular. If you there's a couple of documentaries that Wolfram here at NC State is doing, and those are often available on YouTube. He loves us to promote, his work, obviously, and so that's where I got several of those clips as well. If you'd like, please follow us. We have a small section here in North Carolina State University, but we love to share what we do. We just started our Instagram account, and we highlight our faculty, we highlight our students, we highlight events that we're doing. And if you have events and things that you'd like to share, we always learn from each other. I love hearing what other sections and schools are doing, because it just makes such a vibrant learning community when we share what we have. So thank you so much for attending this morning. I hope you have a continued great conference. It looks like, there's so much to choose from. You guys are going to have a hard time choosing. So good luck. I hope you have a fantastic day.